this last session of our Russian literature seminar in this second semester. We have the great pleasure of hearing today a presentation by Erin Collopy, who is an associate professor of Russian literature at Texas Tech University, which has been well represented this semester also in our seminar.
Go Tech.
Go Tech, absolutely. We've had Madison and Texas Tech, so it's an all-American seminar this semester. Erin Collopy has published numerous papers on Russian language, but her main research fields are, if I'm not miscorrected, Russian women writing and Russian folklore, especially related to the dead and to the vampires. And one of her research projects concentrates on the figure of the Russian folkloric vampire. So if I'm not mistaken, also we'll get to hear some of it today because I hear the topic is Vedьма. So today's topic is Slavic folklore in Teffi's Vedьма, or folklore in Teffi's short stories. So the floor is yours, and thank you again for accepting to be with us today.
And I want to thank all of you for inviting me. I'm excited about being here and having the opportunity to share my research, which at this point is very raw because I've just started with Teffi. And it's okay if I leave it like this. I don't like when I lose the pictures of people on the screen when I go to a full screen. So I'm going to probably be repeating stuff you guys already know, but I would like to go through this because it was new to me. When I thought of Teffi, I thought of her as a humor writer. She wrote funny stories, and beyond that, didn't really think much of her. I'd read a smattering of her work, but nothing that, I never really studied her. As you probably know also, Teffi, the strange little name that she came up for herself. She was born Nadezhda Alexandrovna Lokhvitskaya in 1872. And some of the things that I'm going to talk about right now are kind of watershed moments in her life, because as much as she wrote and as autobiographical as she was, she kept a lot hidden. So there's a lot that she went through, and she kind of peeks out in some of her stories, but she had largely a difficult life when she passed her childhood. The death of her father was very significant. Then she got married, and this is something that is kind of hidden in her own. It kind of comes out in her stories, but it's not clearly, not openly. She married a lawyer, Vladislav Buchinsky, and before the marriage he seemed fine, but then after the marriage he turned out to be, I think, abusive. She ended up leaving him in 1898. I wrote divorce here. Couldn't find an actual divorce date, but she left him permanently in 1898. When she left him, however, she was not accepted back into her family. So she was on her own, and she lived in some difficult situations as far as financially. She didn't start publishing until 1902. And she didn't really become a success until 1908. But when she did become a success, she was a very big success. She was very well known in Russia. She was one of the best known writers. And this period lasted until 1915, when things started to disintegrate in the country. And I want to be clear that she herself saw what was going on in the country and that there was need for change. But she herself was also always anti-Bolshevik. She immigrated in 1919 just because, it was time to get out. She really needed to, and popped around a few places before she landed in Paris and stayed there pretty much the whole time until her death in 1952. And during that period, she didn't live well. It was a difficult living experience, always never enough money, having to change apartments. And she had a lot of ill health. So all in all, it was not the biography I expected of a humorist, though I guess it's not surprising. So my own research, as I've said, it's still very raw. I'm just starting out.
Julia, can you see her? There you go.
Okay, there she is. All right. So the cycle of stories that I'm working on, Viedma, the book itself was published in 1936, and it is a collection of stories that were issued in the daily Russian language newspaper Возрождение over a cycle of from 1931 to 1936. Teffi herself was very proud of this work. I think that she felt insecure about her work because she had to write very quickly, very fast. She lived on her writing, and she didn't have probably the time to really review her work as she would normally have done if she had that luxury. And also because she was kind of dismissed as a humorist, and she herself knew there was a lot more to her writing. So you can see this quote that she has from an excerpt from a letter that she mentions that this is a book that she felt reflected her best writing. The stories in Viedma, there's 14 in all. 6 are first-person narratives that are set at Teffi's mother's estate. And they're all from the period when the child narrator is probably from 6 to 12. There are 4 stories that are third person, and these are young married women who live in provincial towns. The other 4 stories are mixtures of narratives, probably from stories that Teffi had heard from her compatriots in Paris. But each story, just like a book of folklore, if you get the ethnography, is divided into these different mythological characters: the Viedma, Domovoi, Rusalka, and the Banyi Chort, among others. And why these? There's a couple of reasons why. This is the opening sentence to Viedma, which is the first story in the cycle. First of all, Teffi was worried about the children of the immigrants, that they weren't remembering their culture. And she wanted to make sure that it continued. She felt this is something that drew the Russians together, was common to Russian belief. I don't know that she's right, that other people don't have these kind of beliefs, and it's particularly stronger in Russians than in other cultures, but probably much stronger in Russians than it was in French culture. Let's see. So what does Teffi know about folklore? She probably knew about as much as any other educated Russian at the time, which is different from the knowledge that people who were not educated would have. However, she did have one experience. She does see Russian folklore as part of their identity, and I'm going to talk about the story set at the family estate. These first person plural, usually from plural, usually we, usually a little girl and her younger sister, which is generally read as Teffi and her little sister. And the child narrator they straddle this world of the estate servants and their upper class family. So they are able to hear what the servants are saying. In fact, they spend probably more time with their servants than they do with the adults at the age that they are. So a lot of the folklore that they hear, it seems genuine. Teffi probably recalls it pretty clearly, not everything, but she does remember some very specific things. So also the location of Teffi's mother's estate. Here it is in the Volinskaya Oblast. So up in the northwest corner of present-day Ukraine. Here's a place where it was very diverse. There were people from a lot of different cultures there. Well, mostly Slavic, but Germanic too. Also, perhaps Hungary, as if we look at the names of the characters in the story. And this little swath right here, as you see from the image on the right, called Palesia, which has been covered very carefully by Russian ethnographers, and I imagine also ethnographers from other Slavic countries as well. And it is their belief that this is the most stable, most resistant to change, most long-lasting swath of Slavic folklore. There is less possibility for, I don't want to say contamination, but contact with other peoples in this region. Other sources besides memory and growing up in this area and just basically being Russian, it's pretty clear that she used some written sources. We have this work by, well-known work by Sergei Maximov, Nechistaya Nevedomaya и Krasnaya Sila, which probably she borrowed from, also the works of Alexander Afanasyev. So these are the works that inform her folkloric knowledge and how she presents the creatures. So right now I'm going to do three close readings, share three close readings with you. Two of the stories are set in the mother's estate. One of the stories is set as one of the young women in a provincial town. The first story is Damavoy, which came out originally in 1931. As far as the folklore goes, it's probably maybe the closest to what people in Russia know. I mean, I think the Damavoy, and you can correct me, might have the most resonance in Russia of all the folkloric characters. And just the way it's described in the story, it's the typical, mostly avoiding saying Damavoy, usually calling him Haziayan. And what is his function in the household? He looks after household order. He can be a trickster. You know, even now, if someone, you know this yourself, if someone loses something, you know this better than I do. Someone loses something, you know, maybe the Damavoy moved it, or same thing. The story starts out with these images of the nanny losing her things, which obviously she didn't, and blaming it on the Damavoy. Also, in the story, we see that he lets his displeasure be known. If things are not going well in the house, then he lets it be known. Some of the information that that shows up indirectly, which you can find in the work by Maximov, he doesn't like to be seen. The Damavoy wants to be avoided. And this is from Maximov, of course, it's broader than this. He likes to take care of his favorite horse's mane and tail. So if he really likes a horse, he's going to fix up the tail and make sure it's in good shape. So the story, Damavoy, I don't know if any of you had a chance to read it, but there's a little girl, Lucia. She's a sickly little girl, She's always ill, something she can't play because there's always something wrong with her. She's dirty and unkempt. However, she has this gorgeous hair with blonde, long curls. And because of that, everybody, the household servants, when I say everybody, I'm talking about the household servants, talks about how much the Hasiayan loves her, that he shows his love by these curls. And then it follows on. Lucian herself is like a domovoi. She mirrors a lot of the behavior of the domovoi. She follows to her hysterical, performative mother around the house, telling her all the things that she's not supposed to do. Please, don't do this, Mom, don't do that. Also, when they try to find out about her and they ask her name, she closes up her eyes, trying not to be seen, just like a domovoi. So she's not just loved by the domovoi. It could be that a domovoi and Lucia are identified together. So to close off that story, one of the things that's going on is that she is kind of a reflection of the relationship that is being her mother is having with her father. They're both ignoring her. They're both indifferent to her. They're cruel to each other without worrying about how it will impact the child. So she could be seen as a physical manifestation of this disrupted household, of the domovoi, who's supposed to be settled in a house, but is yet in wherever she ends up. She's in this very unhappy situation. So another story, Lesha Chicha, which came out also in 1931. And this story, it has a strange name for Leshi. There are feminine, usually it's the wife of the Leshi. This term Lesha Chicha does appear doesn't appear in the literature and folklore, but in a different form, not as this. According to Dyachkova, who wrote an article on this story, the Lesha Chicha is supposed to be calm and quiet, whereas the Leshi is the one who is in hairy, has the wild cry, has the incredible height. Of course, there's much more to be known about the Leshi, but these are the things that are important for this particular story. Okay, and how she appears. And this is what the story start off with, this humor. In the very beginning, the little girls, Yadja, that's the name of the character of the story, who's the Lesha Chicha, shows up at the family estate with her father, a Polish nobleman. And she's presented as just wrong. She's just too much. She could be pretty, but she's kind of coarse and everything's very strange. After 4 years, however, when the children see her again, and they are the witnesses to everything that happens in the story, she's described in a rather unattractive manner. She's stout. She has a unibrow. She has a mustache. And the regular folk, the servants, all recognize her as something odd, and they make up stories about her. One of them is that when the Panichka was swimming, she was covered in fur all the way to her waist, like a dog. So she is seen by everyone as odd and strange. Her behavior is odd. When left behind by her father, she climbs the tree and slides down to destroy her dress. She escapes through a window at night and runs 10 versts home, which of course I had to look up because I don't know what a verst is. And that is a remarkable amount of distance for a young girl to run home. 4 years later, she's even worse. While the family is traveling through the Count's forest, they can hear this terrible crying. And brings me back to what I said earlier about the Leshi and his cry. The children can't understand. No one can understand what it is. And the coachman says, well, it's the Leshichicha. This is what she does. Other strange behavior when her father visits with Yadja and the other daughter who has been away. Yadja, in her jealousy, pulls up her hair, pulls up her sister's hairs to show how crooked the body of her sister is. The strangest thing of all is that the tree's falling. The tree falls on the sister, killing her. The father himself was almost killed by a falling tree, significantly just before he was about to get married to a young woman in town. However, she herself had nothing physically to do with it. She was in the house when both these things happened. So we have this juxtaposition of the Leshichicha and then this kind of everyday upper class world, the civilization and the wild. The estate of the Polish nobleman, the father of the Leshichicha, he's got a very cultivated park. It's a wild forest, but I think you have that juxtaposition, but also I think the pond is really significant in this. The first time the pond appears is the very beginning of the story before the narrator even meets the young woman. And here we have this potential, this beautiful little man-made lake pond with a man-made island in the middle, and then a swan swimming around. So here's this potential. It's not in the best of shape, but it's lovely. And then the second time it's mentioned in the story is when they're getting the pond ready for the father's marriage. So they're cleaning it out, restoring some of its former glory. However, at the very end, it's the last one, after the Yadja and her father have left. It's now in a very sad state of disrepair, and the narrator can no longer see the swan swimming around. So it is reverted back to its original state. So the Leshi, in this case, the Leshichicha, represents this wildness. And in both stories, and this was repeated in pretty much all the stories, there's a arc. It starts off with humor, and then horror, and then always ends up with some kind of pathos. We have the sickly, grubby Lucia and the repulsive hirsute Yadja. But at the very end, Lucia, as she's witnessing her parents scream at each other, she is terrified with her open eyes, with her closed eyes, excuse me. And then also Lucia, the narrators who have been terrorized by Leshichicha when she came to visit cannot believe that she's anything but monstrous. So they think that the coachman must have lied when he said that the Leshichicha was crying. Can she really cry? It's even funny. So we have this idea of the humor, the horror, and the pathos that make up most of Teffi's stories within this cycle in Viedma, that I think go beyond what we expect from a humor writer. Finally, the last close reading I'm going to do is Janoi, which combines humor, horror. Instead of pathos, it combines the uncanny. The folkloric Vajanoi is pretty much by book. There's at least as he's described at the end and the setting. There's the abandoned mill, which the Vajanoi is attracted to. A drowned person becomes a Vajanoi, and in appearance, he's a very thin old man with a long beard. However, this story is very, very odd. I don't know if anyone had a chance to read it or you've read it before. Everything about this story is destabilized and destabilizing. We have these two characters. We have three characters. The young woman who's going to go stay at this house that her husband has rented that is right next to the mill. Her husband is not there. And it starts off that she's the one, she's the pragmatic, at least in her, she's the pragmatic one. The husband can do any old crazy thing, but she couldn't be there to help pick out the house. So she's worried that it's not going to be okay. But when she gets there, she meets the servants. And first of all, she meets Maria, who is old and kind of creepy and strange manners. She avoids looking at them. And when she asks the other person, who we'll talk about in a minute, about her, oh yeah, she's been feeding the bed bugs in prison. So she's been sitting, and you also see that with her hair. Her hair has been shaved. So even forever, how long she's been in prison, she hasn't been out for very long. So she is disorienting. But even more disorienting is Clasha, Ivan. When Claudia gets to the house and she first meets Maria, sends Maria to town, and then someone else enters this house, the house, and this person is described thusly. There's this huge woman with broad shoulders, long boned, like a man. So, but dressed as a woman. Later, she asks Maria, where is Clasha? Oh, he's swimming. Где же ему быть? So Clasha, and then ему, which Claudia says, who? А ему, Clasha. Then later, when Maria is talking about Clasha, Ivan. Then when she's saying it's Ivan, she says Anna. So she starts out calling Clasha, uses masculine pronouns, switches over to Ivan, uses feminine pronouns. And this is when she says he's a Vajanoi. Still using feminine pronouns. So in this story, we're left wondering what's true and what's not true. Is Claudia starts feeling kind of ill. At first she says, I feel ill. I started to feel as if I got shakes as if from a cold. And it does seem that what's going on, she's in kind of a fevered behavior, but it's never says that she's truly, truly ill. Her husband shows up later, and when she explains everything she has seen, the strange passport that has the same name as hers that belongs to Clasha with the different dates, and he claims that had not happened, that there is no Clasha, that he spoke with Maria. Did Maria kill her husband? She was supposedly in prison, according to Clasha/Ivan, because she had murdered her husband. So that leads us to this kind of open ending. The text as Todorov says in The Fantastic, the text must oblige the reader to hesitate between a natural and supernatural explanation of the events described. And it certainly seems likely, I mean, I don't know, I can't, the husband is trembling at the end of the story. Why is he trembling? Is he afraid of Klasha? Does he think she's mad? Is she mad? The story is left open. And this goes on to why I think, I'll talk about that in a minute, but first, domestic spaces. It's important to talk about how important domestic spaces were to Teffi. She tried her hardest to keep things. She was a very social person. She socialized a lot. She always invited people over wherever she was and always tried to give them nice things and good food and good company. And she would try to hide all her disarray throughout her house because she was living in one single room. This is in Paris. So she had gone from this beloved childhood home where it seems like she had a very strong relationship with her younger sister. And then she marries this man with whom she has a very unhealthy relationship with. She eventually leaves. She leaves her children behind. She lives in difficult situations at that. Then she goes into that whole period of immigration. And all the households that she had, the houses, rented apartments, living at people's houses, living on other people's money, the small bit of success that she had found in Russia, even though she still remained successful, still a very popular writer, she never regained that kind of economic security that she had at that point. So the house, I think, plays a very central role in the home plays a very central role in Teffi's work. So just to conclude, Teffi should be seen as much more than a humor writer. I found this quote by Adamovich. Unfortunately, I cannot find the source. I've been looking for it, so I only have the English translation. And there are writers who muddy their own water to make it seem deeper. Teffi could not be more different. The water's entirely transparent, yet the bottom is barely visible. And I would say this is true for all of her stories. They're very open-ended and they resist interpretation. I'd say the significance of her stories generally remain open, even though there's this consistent kind of humor, horror, or something negative, and pathos in each of them. Okay, I also want to finish off with just how under-researched that I found Teffi. I don't know if anyone has done research on her, but I just kind of assumed there would be a lot written about her, and there isn't. There are a lot of stories that, there's some articles that focus on her nostalgia. There's a few that focus on the folklore. Of course, I've looked at those. But she has, this is, I think, a very rich field if someone is looking for something. If you are interested in that period, if you're interested in poetics of humor or horror, the fantastic, Russian identity studies, people have done nostalgia studies with her, collective trauma, the trauma of experiencing all the displacement that she has undergone, gender studies, she as a woman writer and how she had to live, what she had to do, how she had to be kind of not taken very seriously. There's also autobiography and fiction. And at this point, I'm ready for questions. If any of you would like to ask me questions later, please, I have this available on I'm always available by email. And I'm ready for questions from you. I do ask you to do one thing, however. I don't hear very well. So, and I welcome questions in Russian and in English. But would you please put them in chat for me? Some people speak very clearly, but like Professor Bodan, but if you would do that for me, I would appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Erin, for this talk. We will. It was absolutely fascinating. I didn't know at all these short stories. I will open the floor for questions. So in Russian or in English, and double it in the chat room, please. I have a, no, you have a question?
Well, I do have several questions, but I don't want to monopolize the floor, so maybe I should first let other people ask their questions.
And I also, if anyone wants to ask about, talk about the vampire, I know that is of general interest. I'll tell you this, I teach a class on the vampire at Texas Tech. The students often sign up for it thinking they're just going to watch some vampire movies, and I take them through the ringer. So I'd welcome any questions on Teffi, vampire studies, monster studies.
I do have a question. I will put it in the chat room at the same time. I don't know how well you can hear me. What about the literary, yes, the literary tradition in which Teffi inscribes her short stories? So I will put it in. I will put it in the chat. A question about the literary tradition in which Teffi. Yeah, voilà. Thank you, thank you, Rodolphe. And how much can we how right will it be to compare, or to, I think it will be right to do so, but into what dimension can we compare, or can we measure the influence of Nikolai Gogol on Teffi's stories, especially so the influence of Gogol, especially when you quoted this particular short story in which there was this character of Pannочка. Of course, Pannочка immediately made, I think, more than one of us think of the end of Gogol's Ukraine short stories. So, but in V, Pannочка is a beautiful girl. She's the beautiful girl who excites the male character. I don't remember his name. But here, in Teffi's short story, she's ugly. So is this a satirical turn on Gogol? Is this a satirical way of pinpointing also this, possible literary heritage and overturning it? Because I maybe I didn't hear it, but I think a lot of times Teffi plays a lot with the reader. So how much playing is there at stake? How much playing is there also in these short stories with the literary tradition? How much?
I would definitely say that She is certainly Vodzyanoi is very, to me, very Hoffman-esque, very Gogol-esque. This kind of ambivalence. With Panichka, that's a little harder to say because of the region that she's in, that it would be normal because she was the Polish, she's the daughter of a Polish landlord. But yeah, I guess she was certainly well-versed. She was well-versed in Russian literature, very well-educated, did a literary kind of artistic humanistic track in her own education. Is it Panichka? Panichka from V seems so much more in control, even though she ends up getting killed, but whereas Yadzia, the Yeshachicha, is just wild and she can't control herself. She's just this force of nature. But they are both definitely had these supernatural elements and these kind of odd elements. And she was, I mean, maybe I'm influenced by the film V, the very beautiful woman who played her with the very dark hair. And I can't remember from the short story, did Panichka in that D, was she dark-haired like that? Yes. So yeah, who knows? I mean, when Teffi wrote, she just sat down and wrote a story. According to other sources, she didn't check them, she didn't edit them, she just wrote them, sent them off. I don't know if that's true for every story, but she must have had these things in her head. They must have influenced her at some level. I do see that tradition of Gogol, and so it would make sense that, yeah, perhaps she would know V. I don't know how I would follow that, but it's definitely something to look into. It didn't come to my mind because I was just thinking Panichka, she lives in this area and she's Polish. So, but yeah.
Thank you, Erin. I think that maybe I'm wrong, but I think that Ukraine and Ukrainian folk culture is so is a part of a literary tradition that is so well identifiable that every time one writes something that pertains to Ukraine or to its culture, it automatically inscribes itself within this literary tradition of, of writing about Ukraine. So in this tradition, you have, of course, Gogol, but not only. And this is why I was asking the question of how much this work, this Teffi's work, can be also, seen through this perspective of its inscription, or on the contrary, non-inscription, I'm sorry for my English, within this literary tradition of portraying Ukraine in Russian literature, or in, literature in Russian, written in Russian language.
One thing I'd say about Teffi, these stories, and just these stories in this collection, she really doesn't mention Ukraine. She mentions Poles. She mentions Russians. So maybe an erasure, I don't know. I haven't read enough of her work broadly. Yes, Poland figures very prominently.
Okay.
But it could be. I mean, I'd have to sit down, look at V again. And I feel like I'm fairly familiar with the story V. I've certainly seen that movie about 1 million times because I have to watch it for class. I mean, I see what you're saying. I definitely agree that the Panichka, calling her Panichka would trigger that. Because of the Palesia. Yes, and that Palesia is, yes. It's funny how she doesn't really, I'll have to go back and look. I just don't remember anything specifically that even mentions any term that is connected with Ukraine. And that actually I'm kind of disturbed by that. And I want to go back and look at it again to see why is there nothing when it's in this part of the country. Why are they so erased? But the Panishka is definitely, she writes a lot about Poles and Poles being different and Poles being, kind of the other.
Thank you very much.
I have a question.
Sure, Melanie, go ahead.
Yes, yesterday we have listened a conference on art on Nathalie Parrin, who have illustrated a lot of books for children in France, and there are a lot of books with Russian tales, and the speaker said that Teffi was asked to adapt these tales to children's books, and the speaker said that for Teffi it was a bit difficult to agree, because she was more specialized into humor stories, and she said that it was more for in order to make some money, that she accepted, but that it didn't interest her a lot. But if she has this interest for folklore and tales, I want to have your mind on this team. Maybe you think that it could be interesting for her to adapt these tales, because she's not just this writer of humor stories. I don't know what you think on this team.
That's interesting about Teffi. She, such a talented writer. She loved children, from what I understand. She couldn't write for children. What kept her from doing it? Yeah, what kept her from doing it? I'm not quite sure. I think that because she just didn't have the language for children, and she couldn't speak to them. She did Baba Yaga as a children's story, but it was basically just a reworking of Afanasyev. She did that for children. She wrote another Baba Yaga story, which I hope you all read because it's truly brilliant. Maybe one of the best things I've read by her, but it's only for adults. There was something about her, and it's been discussed. I'd be glad to find the literature for you on that, because it wasn't something that I focused on, other than that some people just don't have that language for you. Think she's so creative. And she knew the folklore, but she couldn't get it across to children in a way that would appeal to them. Or at least she thought she couldn't. It didn't come to her. I don't know if that answers your questions, but I know it's been addressed.
Okay. The coincidence that we had this conference yesterday is quite is good.
Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
How were the? Did you get to see the illustrations?
Yes, yes, we've seen it yesterday.
Yes, I'll have to look that up.
Okay,
Hi.
thank you, Melanie. Any more questions from students? It would be nice to have questions from students in any language you want, because we can translate them into English or whatever language we master.
I actually have a question. So first of all, thank you very much. It was really interesting. So as I understood, folklore is very important for Teffi, and it was also at the same time for illustrators. For instance, I think about Bilibin. So my question was, do you think at the time, like in the 1920s or 30s, there was a new resurgence of interest about folklore, or if it's just some artists or illustrators who were interested with this? So thank you.
You know, I just from Teffi, I mean, knowing that Budin also was interested in folklore. But however, I haven't found any good sources that can show that to me. That was something I did look up, because it seemed to me that there had been, and maybe it's the same thing that Teffi was feeling. The children were losing this connection. The children of Russian immigrants were losing their connection to the country. They're losing their cultural heritage, the cultural memory. Of course, they're making their own new memories, but when you're on the other side, you want them to maintain it. But I can't find a good source that says something that, yes, that definitively, yes, there was this resurgence in. Certainly during the symbolist period there was, and that's talked about, and it's talked about for 19th century, but this particular period, probably because it would have to go under immigrant literature. I don't think that could have been happening in the Soviet Union, and maybe that's why it's not getting enough attention. And that's an article or source area of research that needs to be done.
Did you,
Sorry,
Erin?
I wish I could tell you.
Erin, did you get a chance to see the original edition from 1936? Does it have any illustrations?
I looked and no, I looked I scanned the internet and came up with every kind of way of looking for it. And no, that's why I used the image that I did use, because I wanted to use the original. I don't know. Would Возрождение have any illustrations? I wouldn't think so, would it?
I don't know, but I think it's probably worth checking.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be probably interesting also as a way to check what audience it was made for, depending on the illustration, whether it was meant for a child audience or an adult audience.
It was very clear. It was always for the adults.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? I have a few questions, but here again, I'd rather hear the questions from the students first. Yulia, do you have any question? Yulia is not a student though, but you might have a question.
But you let me speak first. Thank you.
Okay, all right.
So, okay, thank you, Erin. It was a very exciting talk, and I learned a lot. So seriously, it was something that I actually think that in France we don't have many sources on Teffi. Probably someone who's been working on immigrant literature is more or less versed in this kind of literature, but also, of course, not Teffi exclusively, but always Teffi in some kind of context. So always. And I have two questions. Basically, one which probably continues what Rodolphe mentioned about the audience, or about the all this, the way when she immigrated, you didn't talk much about how it happened with her literary writing. Well, you mentioned that she was more successful in Russia, before the First World War, and basically after she left, after the October Revolution. So she continued writing, but I imagine not like immediately after her migration. So she had to settle down more or less, or I don't know, to find her marks, and also to probably to find people who would want to publish her or to present her works. So of course I imagine that her audience, her main audience, she was not aiming at reaching out to the I don't know, French speaking, for instance, literature. Was she? No, not at all. So she continued writing in Russian, and so how did she manage to publish and to be accepted? And the other question will be in probably pursuing the same idea, but also the gender thing. Because if she went to France, when she arrived to France, when she settled down in France, does her status or of an independent writer, of a woman, change it somehow? So was probably she encountered less success, but at the same time she was probably taken more seriously as a woman writer, in the sense that she was she was more confirmed as a writer, and she was independent in a sense as a writer. So the gender mattered less than in Russia, in say before the First World War, before the revolution. So this is another part of this question, and then there is another question which concerns the text, that I was kind of shocked by the examples you gave in your talk, but I can go back to this part of my question later. So after, if it's easier to proceed.
So
like,
how did you manage to publish in France? It was difficult, but there were, because there was such a large Russian immigrant diaspora in Paris, she was able to publish. She also published some things in Poland and in Germany, but it was always a struggle. She got paid usually a salary to write for some of these various Russian language newspapers and journals that showed up over this period of time. Sometimes they would close down. And then she would gather, it was always a struggle to survive. She would gather her stories together and publish them as books. It seems like she lived a pretty hand-to-mouth existence. As far as how she lived as a woman writer in a country that I would assume would be more egalitarian and more accepting of women as professional women, I think because she was so entrenched in the Russian diasporic community that she had so much fame. She had so much fame in Russia. She was so well known. She got by on that. The problem with her being a woman, she wasn't taken seriously as a literary scholar, a literary writer. She was just seen as Teffi, the funny writer, who had these sharp satirical pieces on everybody and anything. So I think that that was her bigger complaint as a woman, was not being taken seriously. And like I said, I have to work with the materials that I have. And I'm going to go to Columbia this summer to look at some of her archival material, but I think it's been fairly well combed. I don't know if I'm going to come up with that much more than it's already out there, sadly. So
no, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to just conclude pretty much the same thing. It was a difficult life, but she probably survived better than a lot of writers. Boonin, of course, received the Nobel Prize when he was in France in immigration, but he spent his money immediately and had no money, and they're all poor, and they're all poor with each other.
Thank you. You had another question, Julia. Go ahead.
So this is follow-up question first, because I was thinking about how would she be probably part of this new like body of text of Russian feminine writers, and like be somehow, I don't know, rehabilitated in a sense. So I mean, this minor writers who are considered as minor, or have been considered as minor, compared to the great Russian literature, as we call like Russian novels and so on. Is there some kind of also a desire? I'm not talking about you, because, well, of course you have also your interest in folklore and so on, but also the desire to kind of, you know, bring on the fore all those feminine writers, Russian feminine writers who have been neglected for some time. Is there some kind of tendency, or I don't know, trend in wanting to get back to those writers, and probably also make Teffi one of those important writers, Russian writers of the turn of the century, well, like beginning of the 20th century?
I'm wondering too about that. Russians have actually written the most about Teffi, but usually a lot from folklore, a lot about her folklore. There has been interest. She's usually included she's usually included when they have Russian women writers. She's almost always included. She's included when they have anthologies of, and I don't know what's going on in France. France, I think only saw like, you know, I didn't really dig down, but I think I only saw one article in French about Teffi, which surprises me since she spent so much time here. There, but yes, where you are. Yeah, I think that more of the writers that seem to be popular right now are 19th century, more realist writers. I just haven't seen it, even though, you know, I think that might make a big difference is Robert Chandler's translations into English have kind of brought her back into the public eye. And maybe people, you know, switch through countries, and more people will start just thinking about Teffi. I don't know. She is included in the canon, but she's not researched that much. I'll end with that.
Well, she's not, I mean, I haven't looked up, I don't know, Rodolphe and Dasha, for the translations, because I've never heard of any French translations. It's kind of hard. Yes, there are some.
I think there are.
Yeah.
As you know, I'm no specialist of early 20th century Russian literature, but I think that she's been translated, and I can actually remember of one paper on Teffi written by one of my former colleagues from Strasbourg. The problem, Erin, the problem with French slavistics is that it is also quite poorly indexed in international indexes. Because it's written in French. So it's very possible that there are existing scholar works on Teffi in French, but that they never made it through the language wall and entered the global space of scholarship because they're poorly indexed. But if you're interested, I can look it up for you.
I had hoped that, because, you know, I've noticed over the years how active Russians are about getting, you know, their work online, so that it's really easy to find Russian work in Google Scholar now.
Right. Yeah.
And that's not true. That's not true for French.
It's less true than for Russians or you know, scholars working in.
Yes, I've heard that complaint from my French colleagues that we don't get the citations.
No, that's true. But we don't need the citations as bad as the Russians do, because our salary does not depend on the citations. So I think, thank you, Yulia. I think that it was interesting when I was listening to Julia's question, and when I was listening to the talk, I think that it would be an interesting thing to do, but maybe it's been done already, to look at the way immigration had an impact on gender politics, because would being a female writer in emigration be different from being a female writer in Russia before the revolution? And I think that it's even more interesting in the case of Teffi, since she was a very successful writer in Russia, and I have no idea about the role played by her gender in that success before 1915. I think it would be interesting to explore, but again, it might have been done already. So thanks a lot. I have a few questions. You actually brought up a few names that I had been thinking about while I was listening to you, and you talked about Bunin, and I thought that Bunin was very relevant probably in this whole picture, because Bunin is famous for writing about eroticism. Sexuality plays a very large and important part in Bunin's work, and I was wondering whether you could elaborate on sexuality in this collection of works. Because first I wanted to ask you if the fact that Teffi's narrators are children was intended to frame these short stories as stories for children. You answered that, obviously, and the answer is visibly no. But then I was wondering whether the choice of children narrators had to do something with a desire to represent, sexuality as something strange, kind of supernatural, seen from a child's eye, and kind of scary. Because I think that so one of you have transformations, right? Creatures moving from one body to another body, from like a female body to a hairy, monstrous animal body. I don't know if that could be seen as a metaphor for puberty or anything. Maybe you can tell me what you think about this. Then you have this gender fluidity of that Ivan, who is Klasha and is a Vodyanoi, and I was wondering whether you could elaborate on that and on the connection with water, since we talk about gender fluidity. And so I was wondering whether the child's eye, the child's gaze, was a way to maybe to express some kind of discomfort with transformations that go with puberty, access to sexuality, to being an adult, and so on and so forth. Thank you. That was my first question.
Okay, so as far as the children viewing sexuality, I think they, if anything, they would equate that period with being an adult, and they felt left out. They wanted to be with their older sisters and brother and hang out and do all the adult stuff. So I think that they were eager for aging. Is the Yadya, the little Yashichicha, she's oddly asexual. I'm trying to think of anything that would be, even though she has this transformation from this awkward, unpleasant girl, prepubescent girl, to this kind of animal as she becomes older. There is some sexual, maybe, because one thing I'd say, talk about this veneer civilization, she loves her father. She loves her father. her father does not like her. So something incest there that is very subtle. It would have to be very subtle, which the children would not pick up on, I don't think. There are other instances not in Leshichycha or Domovoy where we really see sexuality at play, but there is a story called Obaritny, where one of the characters in the story is, and Teffi's pretty open about this, is a lesbian, and then her transformation is she becomes a man, and she presents as a man in Germany, and her name is Yevgenia Onegin. So lots of humor there, but also, yeah, kind of mocking of her too. I'm interested now that you say that this kind of incestuous kind of thing that could be going on and very deeply underneath the surface with Leshichycha, some kind of dark, primal, dangerous force. And the other stories, they're I think they're like typical children. They're not frightened by it. They're curious and they want to know more. They want to. Mm-hmm. They see what's going on. They know they don't. I'm sure from the child perspective that Teffi's trying to show, they don't have true full understanding.
Right.
But they're curious. They see it.
Well, sexuality is a thing that, on a symbolical level, children are very curious about in in psychoanalytic theory. What about gender fluidity? Because so there's something, I guess, common between the tale about the little girl who is associated with the Domovoy. So she's female, but she's kind of associated with a magical creature that is male. And then there is the story with Vodyanoi, where it's out there in the clear, right? What about this? What can you make of it?
Okay, so there's a little girl who, and that is kind of a Domovoy can appear as a female. Domovoy will appear as a female if there's no men in the house.
Oh, okay.
And that is true. Come to think of it, thank you for reminding me. There are no men in the house of the only man who shows up is the husband, who shows up later to find his wife and child, and they terrorize each other. My own reading of these, and it's a pretty simplistic, straightforward reading, is that these are things that basically there's some kernel of truth, something that really happened in Teffi's memory, and then she transforms these different dimensions. So the fact that it's a little girl, but she's also kind of making her into some kind of Domovoy, and how Domovoys can be different according to what household they live in. The Domovoy in their house, or the house that the narrator lives in, he plays tricks, but he's good and he's nice. And the Domovoy in another house, he's mean and he spits in the dough, and he befouls the servant girl's hair, and he doesn't do nice things. And then if Lucia's a Domovoy, she's trying to maintain order, but she has no power whatsoever. So I think it's a pretty loose connection. So as far as gender, not in that one. I think the gender fluidity in Vodyanoi is different because it's just more destabilizing. The function is just to be disruptive and take the structure away, make it. Because I think that the very conscious decision to have this one character go off and start presenting as a man and giving himself this new name, which is very, very mocking when she does it. usually Teffi has always got a little bit of, even no matter how cool she is, she's got a little bit of generosity. She can still see the humanity in every person. She's not kind to this person. She's pretty negative. So I don't know. I would have to look at a lot more stories beyond Vietnam to see if there was something else going on with.
Right, and you mentioned the importance of house descriptions of households. Is that gendered too? Do you think that you could compare that to, for instance, Tolstoy's Детство, which is really focused on describing a household as well? What would you make of that? Would that be different?
I know for sure that Teffi adored Tolstoy's Детство and read it to tatters. And I think that maybe her memory of her own household probably was informed by that.
With a desire
the domestic space in women's writings, I probably, because of just tradition, I think it's pretty significant in her work, whereas I'd have to go back to Детство to reread it. I haven't read it in years to see how the funny thing is the kids are almost never in the house. They're always outside running around looking. I mean, they're maybe in the room with the nanny. She doesn't spend a lot of time describing the physical place in this. It's more the mood, this feeling of being free and running around and hearing, these people say this and people say that. And a lot of time spent outdoors because it's their summer home.
Right. Well, yeah, it is something that is important in Tolstoy's Детство, because the whole idea was to try to reconnect with one's childhood through recollections about sensations and emotions instead
Yeah,
of
I think she's very
recollections
directly
about
influenced
facts.
by him.
Well, it would be interesting to compare them from the point of view of gender politics, I suppose.
Yes, I think so too. There's just there's a lot, like I said. I'm interested in, since I didn't work on the communal apartment, I'm really interested in Bachelard's Poetics of Space. But he always talks about the positive, the home and what it can give you. And I'm more interested in the disrupted space, as Teffi in her later life experienced. So she had this really positive experience earlier on in life in her childhood home, but then it shifts to these more negative experiences that she describes in these temporary housings with uncanny things occurring. And then finally, I don't know, I'll have to read her French set of stories to see what goes on there, how she describes her houses there.
Okay.
But I think that's a very rich area of possible research.
Thank you.
No vampire questions, huh?
No, well, is there a vampire in this collection of short stories?
There's a Verdelak, there's an Upuir, but that very region they're not as common, so probably less so. And it's not very folkloric. It's a little vampire, but because Verdelak isn't even it came into the Russian language from Prosper Mérimée. It's not even a legit word.
Yeah.
So
did you get a chance to talk to the Polish
yes,
PhD students?
I did. She sent me some of her work and I started reading, and it's very good.
She gave a talk in Strasbourg 2 days ago, and she showed us some crazy Russian contemporary material about vampires.
Oh, there's a lot out there right now.
Oh yeah, and it's incredible to see how vampires are flexible in terms of pretty much anything, and how you can use them to express any kind of ideology. It's just crazy.
Yes.
And she showed us clips from 2 TV series right now. One is called Karamora. Have you heard about this?
There's
It's,
so many out there. I just can't
yeah,
keep up with it all.
it's very recent. Karamora. It's about cops fighting terrorists on the just before the revolution, and I didn't quite get who were the vampires, but I think that the cops are fighting vampires, and the vampires are the socialist revolutionaries. So they're the terrorists trying to, pull up bombs and things like that. So that was one thing. The other one is Piche Block. Have you
Yes.
heard about this one?
Mhm.
And I
Yes.
was
That's really interesting.
yeah, it is really what she showed us really looked like Stranger Things, though. I mean, it's really it's
Oh, so
incredible.
yeah, because I haven't finished reading the novel. Tony's finished reading it. But it's a novel, and then there's the series, which I have a copy of. I haven't watched it yet.
Yeah, well, it looks exactly like Stranger Things. Even the title, everything.
But the
Oh.
novel, I think, was written before Stranger Things existed. It's
I'm
Alex Stepanov.
Sure, I'm sure it
The
was.
novel was definitely written before. When did the series come out?
Well, probably after Stranger Things again.
Indeed,
The series
Because
came
was
out.
was there a talk about the the satirical TV show, the political and satirical one with vampires in Russia today? I don't remember how it's called. It's something like Vampire средней полосы, quelque chose comme ça.
Yes, yes. I saw the first episode, and then because I have to pay to get more, I just went and ordered the video set, the DVD. And that's on my million of things, vampire things that I need to watch. Do you like it?
I haven't watched it myself, but I know of this because a few years back we've invited one of the Russian specialists on vampires from Yekaterinburg to a conference, and so she talked about this series. So
If you could send me her name, I
yes,
would
of
really
course. I will
appreciate
find it and I will send it to you. Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And where does it come from, your interest in vampires? Is it like, does it come from a popular culture, like more or less or?
Honestly,
did you?
I don't like vampires. I mean, I like good literature. I like things that are done well, but I've never been a vampire fan. I had to take over teaching a vampire class for our department. And so I said, oh, I don't, there's nothing here about, this folkloric vampire from Slavs in English. It's very, very under researched, and I'll write a book about it. And I like how flexible, as Rodolphe points out, how flexible the vampire is as a monster.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm interested in how people view the other, or they view themselves as other, and how that is projected onto the vampire in literature, film. It used to be the vampire was just a monster and needed to be slayed, and now the vampire can be a hero. So it's a very flexible creature, but I just like, examining the fears, anxieties that are in the particular culture of the time. So that's my interest in vampires.
Is there any difference between American culture, between probably your approach when you were studying the American culture, for instance, and of course contemporary culture, and all this, of course, movies and series and all those phenomena which are quite recent, and in comparison with Russia, with Russian context, or historically speaking, probably, because if it goes back to those East European, of course, presentation of the vampire, which has been which has moved or kind of circulated in the Western, then circulated and moved to the Western space.
Mhm. Yeah, I think
So-
that if I understand correctly, I think that the vampire that developed, the vampire popular culture that came out of the Slavic folklore, particularly South Slavic, it eventually is going to influence the view of the vampire all across the world. And then there's going to be, every culture is going to rework it within its own image, what they need from it. As far as Russia goes, I think they do the same thing. And there's just so much out there. They can be vampires who are positive characters, but it always has to do with something very particular within the culture.
Yeah, that's an interesting
Regardless of
point.
what
because,
kind of vampire it is,
Yeah.
because there are vampire books with the vampires good, there's vampires that are bad. Like there's the series that you were talking about, about the vampires of the, not Pisha Block, but I think Pisha Block, they're just bad. Or they're actually kind of heroes, and they're the preservers of Russian culture and Russian tradition and Russian empire.
This is interesting. Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah, it has.
considering the situation of the Russian Empire right now.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot to be found in these vampire works. Lukyanenko, he's not pro vampire, but I guess all the Inia are somehow vampiric because they feed off of the regular people. I mean, he's, well, you know how he is. If you don't, Lukyanenko and his attitudes towards, he's very, very empire thinking.
The Polish student mentioned Pilevin's ideological evolution from his book, how is it called, 25V or something?
On Pierre,
Right, right. And then a new book which came out about a Russian Batman in New York or something, but it's which recently came out and has become and is obviously very nationalistic. Have you heard about that?
No.
Yeah, it's a new book and it's very different from the you'll have to check it out. I think it's his last book. It's probably from 2020 or something. And
His last
You
one
know
is,
who Tony is the one who's our Pilevin expert. He reads all of Pilevin,
Right.
though I don't know why.
Dasha, did you
Hello.
hi there, Tony. Dasha, did you hear about that one?
not about the one on Batman and the Russian Batman. For me, the Russian Batman was always in Russian contemporary prose. It's the monument in Moscow that looks like Batman.
Yeah.
It's referred to as the Russian Batman is the monument to cosmonauts, if I'm not mistaken, in Moscow.
Oh, really?
And I think in Pilevin, I think it's Generation P. There's a reference of the Russian Batman, but I haven't heard about the one in New York. I think the last one was, on the contrary, it was on the same sarcastical theme. It's called something like KGBTQ plus, something like this, like a variation on LGBTQ, but KGB. So this is, I think this is the last one. It was out like a few months ago after the war has started. So, but I'll check also the one on New York.
Okay.
Yeah, there's two books in his vampire series, on Pierre, and the other one is
Batman Apollo.
Batman Apollo.
Yeah,
That's it.
that's right.
Batman Apollo, yeah.
It does have Americans in it, and they are like hermaphrodites.
It's a difficult book to read, as far as he's not my favorite writer in the first place. I know Tony likes him quite a bit.
Wait a minute. Let me defend myself against that charge. I liked his early stuff. I wasn't even able to get through his what was the second to the most recent, transhumanism, and I don't know.
Yeah, so, but it's a very, the Apollo, from what I remember about Batman Apollo, it's very metaphorical, metaphysical. And it's much, it's in fact, I think that the very fact that it was one of the books by Peter Levin not translated to English says a lot.
Yeah, it is. I just remembered. Yes, she did. It is the book that she was thinking about. And she said that there was a clear ideological evolution between Empire V and Batman Apollo.
I'm gonna have to go, I mean, I trust her. I'll just have to go look at it again.
Mm.